and let us all do we can to build a better future.
With that being said, we are going to move on now to our next story, and it has to deal with something that was already covered by the Jimmy Dore Show, but I want to bring light to it because this is a fantastic article from the Gray Zone, and it calls into question, really, what is happening with BreadTube? I think we all have heard of this. This is a story that,
it's delicious.
Yes, well, it's not that delicious once you hear about it. Leaked files expose Syria PsyOps veteran astroturfing BreadTube star to counter COVID restriction critics. So, as you know, on YouTube, there are certain trigger words that will upset the YouTube algorithm. This live stream might be limited, or if we talk about certain whistleblowers or activists or journalists or people who, yes, if we speak out, about anything that might trigger the algorithm, our channel will get hit. But certain channels seem to be protected, and they can talk about it with impunity and not get limited or demonetized, and still have and still grow continuously.
By the way, I want to go ahead and say, for the record at this point, if there is a independent media YouTube channel out there that's growing at a good rate, they're not your friend. That's, I think, maybe the best way we can actually utilize to tell good sources from bad. If they're growing quickly, there's a reason, and it's probably not them beating the algorithm. We have to do a show every single day and clip it just to slowly lose subscribers from YouTube, and that's roughly the case everywhere.
Yeah,
and I mean, if a channel's growing more than 1.5% a month,
yeah. Well, here's the thing, because I want to explain this to our audience too, because again, Jimmy Dore did a fantastic job covering this article, as did the writers Kit Klarenberg, no relations, but us Kits got to stick together, and Max Blumenthal as well. And Max Blumenthal was on Jimmy Dore's show, and he went into detail about this article. So, and if anything, be sure to check out Jimmy Dore's video. But we want to talk about this too, because we've been getting messages from our viewers of what's happening with the YouTube algorithm, why certain independent channels are being censored and suppressed, and why other channels that are very pro-democratic establishment or maybe speaking out talking points that you would hear from MSNBC or other establishment media outlets, there's a reason why. So leaked documents have revealed state-sponsored influence operation designed to undermine critics of the British government's coronavirus policies by astroturfing a prominent founder of BreadTube clique of anti-fascist YouTube influencers. Now, look, I'm all for, standing up against, people who are abusive, who maybe have horrifying policies or political points of view. But at the same time, too, here's what this article goes on to say. The project aims to conduct psychological profiling on British citizens dissenting against policies such as mandatory vaccination and lockdowns, then leverage the data to establish a YouTube channel that portrays these critics as dangerous super spreaders of disinformation. Designed to curb the influence of pseudoscience material online with specific examples on coronavirus-related anti-vaccine sentiment, the operation is run by the UK's Royal Institution and dubbed challenging pseudoscience. This is also towards how the establishment media has been smearing people like Joe Rogan or making these horrible false claims about him, or anyone else that's really been critical of how corporate media and, of course, our two-party system has been handling the coronavirus pandemic.
Everyone who doesn't agree with us is evil.
Yes, so its top patron is Charles, the Prince of Wales. Oh my goodness. Next in line to the British throne, who recently hit out at supposed conspiracy theories surrounding COVID-19 vaccines. The organization received a substantial cash injection in 2020 from the UK government's Culture Recovery Fund, earmarked for video production. Leaked files obtained by the Gray Zone, who's doing fantastic work, by the way, indicate that the Royal Institution has enlisted the services of Valiant Projects, a social change communications firm founded by a public relations operative previously involved in the UK's Foreign Office campaign for violent regime change in Syria. Valiant has also been sponsored by the U.S. Agency for International Development, a U.S. intelligence cutout for a project aimed at investigating disinformation. Remember, when it comes down to intel, this is the same U.S. and U.K. intelligence services that said that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Hey, how'd that turn out? Daniel, do you remember? Do we find those things, or are they still out there?
I think Rumsfeld forgot where he put them.
Ah, That explains it. Oh, wait. These are the same intelligence service agencies that also said that Russiagate was a thing. And how'd that turn out, Daniel, with Russiagate?
A lot of people are really, really upset and more likely to nuke or go to war with places, and people
Yeah.
have been distracted.
Exactly. So, Valent's central role in the operation highlights the trend of information warfare specialists bringing the techniques they honed against targets like Syria, like the Syrian government, back home to the West, where increasingly unpopular governments confront masses of citizens ever bristling at the coronavirus restrictions. As in Syria, where communications firms like Valent created, trained, and instrumentalized media organizations to further regime change objectives, they have covertly recruited a famed British YouTuber influencer to lend their carefully calculated messaging campaign and authentic flavor. So, according to internal documents, Valent plans to design a mass appeal social media campaign fronted and owned by prominent social media figure Abigail Thorne, the founder of the Philosophy Tube. Valent's research on British citizens who reject official policy on COVID-19 will be used to devise a campaign that utilizes YouTuber Abigail Thorne's existing platform to achieve a measurable cognitive shift in the target audience, the file state. So here's the thing. If these governments were really at least confident in their policy decisions, they would not need a YouTuber. This tells you how pathetic a lot of these organizations are, that they got to stoop to the level of trying to get a YouTuber or an influencer to try and change public opinion. Here's what happened. Now let's focus on the United States, because I don't want to.
Can I say
again,
real quick?
Go ahead, Daniel.
It also means that every time they tell you that YouTube doesn't change anything, they disagree with themselves because they think it might.
Right. Well, there's one other thing here too, because let's focus with what happened in the United States, especially when the pandemic hit, when Trump was president. Like, obviously, no matter what, whoever was going to sit in office, the United States was never ready for something like this. We were never ready for a nightmare scenario like this that has impacted the lives of millions of Americans. And I'm just focusing right now here in the United States because the rest of the world was impacted with the pandemic as well. But let's look at what happened here in America. And the reason why there's a lot of people that are hesitant to trust our government. Number one, when the lockdowns happened, people still had to pay the bills. People still had to go to work. People still had bills to pay and debts to pay. And our government was basically saying, well, you're on your own. Millions of Americans, and even right now as we enter into 2022, are still at risk of being evicted from their homes and apartments. We were abandoned in 2020, just like how we were abandoned in 2021. The policies of maybe doing a UBI were ignored. We only got 3 stimulus checks, and that still didn't do anything. The Americans that did get them, that money evaporated. Small businesses were shutting down. People were, were at risk of being without shelter. We do not have Medicare for all here in the United States. We don't have student debt forgiveness or medical debt forgiveness. Constantly, corporate media was giving us one message, and the establishment of two-party system was giving us another message. No one was clear and concise. And even then, during the election, where you had Biden making this ridiculous statement that he was going to cancel the virus and make sure that everything was going to go back to normal. Even then, what a dumb promise to make, because we're still dealing with it and it's getting worse. The problems that we are dealing with for these 2 years will enter into the 2022 midterm election cycle, and no damn influencer, no damn YouTuber, no one at all will be able to shift the public's anger at the fact that millions of Americans here in the United States were abandoned. And people are still left asking questions of why this happened in the first place. And so when it comes down to people like Joe Rogan, who is really critical at criticizing the media or the two-party system, or people like Jimmy Dore, or anyone else in independent media that actually has the audacity to be like, wait a minute, stop. You're speaking out of both ends of your mouth. What are you talking about? I think it's only fair that this article that's been written by the Gray Zone, by Kit Klasenberg and Max Blumenthal, shines a light of what's really wrong with the messaging and dealing with this pandemic. Because no matter how this plays out, whether you are for vaccination or against it, all I'm going to say is please be safe out there. But the people who are supposed to lead us still have no idea what they're doing. And this is how pathetic they are getting right now by trying now to control and censor speech, especially on big tech platforms. Daniel.
So I actually have a way more positive take on this for a couple reasons I'll lay it out, not because it's good, but because of sort of what things represent. So first and foremost, I think this is another one of those stories that's a bit funny. Because again, it's one of those, hey, we can't give you time off paid, we can't give you UBIs, but we can fund intelligence agencies who used to work with Syria to go out and corrupt and force corruption on YouTubers and hope that that message spreads through to accomplish something. I know, I think that's kind of funny, that it's kind of a desperation piece that I'm talking about, that the British government's like, well, what if we get Philosophy Tube to tell us what to think? And see if that makes a difference. I mean, I think everyone's kind of made up their mind at this point about how they're going to act about the whole thing. I don't think any channel. I think that if we right now picked a side, one or the other, which again, it's not our place to do so anyway, it wouldn't change anyone in the audience's mind, and I don't really think that's going to be the case. Anyway, so that's part one. The parts where I find this funny is, first of all, I think it proves that they know that YouTube is very influential. As much as they pretend that television is the only place where it's at, they know YouTube is very influential. A lot of stuff's going on here. And again, we talked earlier in the segment, we know we're screwed because we haven't fallen down that line along with a lot of other people. We're just better positioned to deal with it. But I don't know. I just think it's like, this is the best they can do at this point in time. It says, here's the implicit thing that they're saying is, putting everything on television, making everyone on all the news networks say exactly what they want isn't enough. The government dictating bad science, or how the myriad of ways that they dictate bad information, that hasn't worked. The news hasn't worked. Forcing government policies, forcing shutdowns hasn't worked. It hasn't broken people's will to resist what's happening. In fact, it's doing quite the opposite. This is them going, what else can we do? And this is also after them going, shut down all the news channels that don't agree with us, that aren't mainstream, which we've dealt with since the start of the pandemic anyway. Yeah. This is them going, okay, none of that's working. We need to try one more thing. And I got to tell you, I don't think it's going to work either. I think that all they're doing is showing who can be corrupted. And ironically, they're pulling a force the vote.
Exactly. And, there's a couple things here, too, because the article, I mean, again, shout out again to the team at the Gray Zone who, we covered this a few months ago, where they were in the fight for their lives against being smeared, and they were able to stand up against all these people who are attacking them and trying to take down their organization. The Gray Zone did a phenomenal piece on this, and Jimmy Dore did a great coverage with Max Blumenthal also adding in his commentary too to the article that he worked on. But there's a lot to take away from this, and this is where I have to say again, we have to be for free speech, especially here in the United States. Now, there are consequences, but this cancel culture that we're seeing and how it's favoring certain people over others, it's not going to work because there is a clear growing anger that we're seeing here. And especially amongst independent media, especially amongst smaller channels too, where we are trying to cover stories that corporate media won't cover, or at least give our commentary on stories or give a different perspective, it is being silenced. We have been given strikes and shadow bans. This is the 5th time recently. This happened to us 5 times in a row right now, to where we've been silenced or been given a strike. And that impacts the work that we do here and the team that we have here. But yet, on the other hand, we're seeing how the establishment system is working with big tech for other certain influencers and YouTubers that are then given so much immunity. It's showing the hypocrisy of really what does it mean for free speech in this country, because it is the government, big tech, and YouTube and corporate media basically saying free speech for some who will say what we want and everyone else is silenced, because I can't support something like that. And I got to say, huge shout out to Rockfin and Odyssey, because we've never had these problems, but yet on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, we are seeing this suppression. And the Gray Zone, again, lays it out perfectly about the hypocrisy, especially when we see it amongst quote-unquote leftist YouTube channels.
And I just wanted to point out, the most recent strike we got was for the only video in months that broke 3,000 views, because we're being artificially kept between 1,000 to 2,000 views per live stream, and under 1,000 views per clip. Whereas previously we were getting, 10, 15,000 views a clip. it's, what we're dealing with. It's not what certain people in BreadTube seem to be dealing with. And they also mentioned in that entire thing, they didn't specifically talk about him in the context that we're talking about. Like, obviously, Vosh falls under this category as well. He's the children of Hollywood elites. And what does he preach all the time? He yells at channels that fight war. So
yeah, and also
not new.
again, what's really common amongst these larger quote unquote BreadTube channels is that when it comes down to whistleblowers or journalists or activists that have the courage to do and even not only talk the talk but walk the walk in regards towards challenging the establishment system, they're the first ones to condemn said individuals. And yet on YouTube, if I were to say their names, we might get stricken down, or use it at YouTube will say, well, wait a minute, did you say this was not correct? Because we've been getting so many hits from YouTube in regards to saying, especially for some of our videos, that, oh, this is misinformation. We are covering stories that CNN or MSNBC or Fox News are talking about. When I did that, but before this recent strike, our fourth strike was, I was covering Joe Rogan and how he was being smeared by CNN. But yet YouTube sent the message to me saying, oh, well, you were giving false medical misinformation. I was talking about how Joe Rogan was being smeared by CNN. Two different things altogether.
Yeah, it's, again, I want to remind everyone, and we have to listen to our YouTube overlords on this one. If you've been vaccinated, remember, you can't get sick.
Exactly.
YouTube said it. It must be true.
Exactly. So there we go. Can't argue with YouTube, but yet thankfully there's platforms like Rockfin and Odyssey. And I want to say to our viewing audience, because we got 256 people in here watching us live right now, thank you so much. Double check and triple check that you are still subscribed to us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on Rockfin and Odyssey too. It will really help us out, because I don't know how much longer we'll be on YouTube or what other BS reasons they will give to delete us or do whatever. But the point is, we need to have real independent media. And if we don't have free speech in this country, well, say goodbye to the press. But all in all, it seems quite clear that the establishment has its favorites. Again, shout out to the work from the Gray Zone. Shout out to Jimmy Dore for having Max Blumenthal on. And also want to give a shout out to Kit Klasenberg, who wrote on this article. Clearly, there are people speaking truth to power. And now more than ever, everyone keep your head on a swivel. And for whatever content creator you're following, double check that you're still subscribed, because I still get messages from viewers saying, why was I unsubscribed? I want to make it very clear to everyone watching, we don't have the power to unsubscribe anyone from our channel. That's YouTube doing that. And ultimately, it falls upon you to ensure that you're still following your favorite content creator. And that's not how things should be done. But yet this seems to be something YouTube likes to do a lot.
It's so crazy. Like, we're literally moving back into television and radio just so we have grounding against YouTube.
Yeah. So that's the situation we're in, and we're very grateful to our viewing audience for understanding. And there we go. Again, shout out to the people at the Gray Zone, speaking truth to power, and again, covering stories that corporate media is afraid to cover as well.